We're really excited. We have a leader on our tech practice. We haven't seen Zac Colip on here in a minute, have we?
It's been a moment, that's
It's
for
been a
sure.
moment. Let's bring
Mhm.
him on in.
Let's bring him in. Hey, Zach.
Hey guys, how's it going?
It's great. How are you doing being back from Mexico? We enjoyed some time with you last week.
Yeah, it's colder, but it's good to be back,
You seem like
back
you're
with the
still
kids.
radiating the heat, though. Like, I cannot believe how much color you got.
I know I was curious if I could do this with like the video off, just so I don't like give anybody a sunburn out there.
Well, I'm sure
We're feeling it
yeah, it's gonna transition to a nice tan any day now, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
any day. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Before we kind of get started, will we see your face on LinkedIn a lot, but just in case anyone's new here, will you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do at Hirewell?
Sure. I'm the vice president of our tech practice. I've been here for over 9 years, and also host the Tech Leaders Hiring Well series, where we interview tech leaders. If anybody out there is interested.
I love that series. It's so
Love.
cool that you started doing that, and I like that people are getting into content now. James has been pushing it for a long time, so I'm glad you've joined the dark side with us, Zach.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Happy to have you. Well, we wanted to kind of talk to you. Like we've been discussing this actually for months, and kind of had you slated down for this topic because we know that you love talking about it. So we kind of want to talk to you a little bit about some like biases that we see in recruiting. So kind of starting off, what are just some of the general biases that you encounter when we're partnering with clients?
Yeah, there's quite a few biases that you probably don't even think when you're like putting together your resume or really even putting together a job description on the hiring side. But I think like thinking about these things can kind of change the results of either your interview process or the people that apply to the position. The biggest one that I see like a big difference in is like title and rank bias. Like everybody's looking for certain titles, but companies all go by, different titles and ranks. So it's
Totally.
really tough to judge, who fits where in the organization. So that's one you got to be kind of careful about how you present yourself in. Another thing is like years of experience. Years of experience is tough because like what's the difference between 3 years of experience and 4 years experience? But like
Mhm.
hiring managers will eliminate people for that. And so don't ever discount like, just throwing up the year that you started, throw in the month, think about it. Also, I think folks need to be more cognizant about ageism in general. There's older folks that, can definitely do the job. There's younger folks that can step up to the plate and kind of surprise people. Another thing is like the number of job, like the number and duration of jobs. Job hoppiness is probably the biggest thing we see like folks getting pinged for
Yeah.
when the clients don't want to interview them. So it's something to be cognizant of as you approach your career. And then like career gaps, education, previous organizations like big versus small organizations, startups, like really look for folks that come from startup environments. That's like a
Great
big
point.
one. Likewise, like big companies want people coming from big companies.
Yeah, we see that a lot.
And then keywords and then length of like the resume were the last two that I kind of pinpointed as being big ticket items that we see come up quite a bit.
Yeah, that's an extensive list, but you're right with all of those. I can wholeheartedly say that I have had hiring managers push back on every single one of those items throughout my recruiting career. And I think it's interesting to think about too, like the number and duration of jobs and how that has changed with regards to COVID too. Like people are willing to make a move sooner than maybe they have before because happiness is important to them or flexibility or whatever it may be. And a lot of people had jobs cut short due to that too. So being able to think about those things and educate our clients and kind of push back on certain areas, I think is important because you could lose out on really great candidates if you're using these as essentially requirements of whether or not somebody can be a good fit. So, Zach, like what kind of advice would you give to companies that hold these biases as requirements for candidates?
Yeah, really, I think the biggest thing here is, traditionally, I think, especially like on the tech side of things, companies have really looked for specific profiles. And now, like, the market is extremely hot, and you kind of got to loosen some requirements to get a bigger candidate like flow. And so like thinking about some of these things and which ones you're comfortable with loosening, I think is a smart way to approach searches that maybe you've been struggling with. Also, like consider that like people from like say like for instance for the big versus like, startup kind of thing, people come in with different perspectives from different organizations, and sometimes you don't even know, what you need until you bring them in or start interviewing them and realize that they could be a real asset for your company.
That's a great point, for sure.
Totally. And just like that adds like a sense of diversity to the team too, right? Because they're coming in with different like perspectives and different experiences that they actually, if you were biased and like had eliminated them, you might lose out on that fresh perspective and like something awesome that they could add to your team.
Yep, exactly, exactly. And I think it's like there's a real temptation to throw down kind of like every requirement you would want in a perfect candidate, and I think you do more harm than good in that respect.
Yeah.
And then there's like another thing that I always think about. It's like when you're putting together a job description, sometimes they're put together really quickly. You don't have much time, and it's sloppily done. But then when you see resumes coming through, you're like, no, that's too sloppy. It's a double-edged sword. You got to be careful.
Wow.
Agreed.
Look in the mirror. No, that's awesome. I mean, is there any advice that you could give candidates, like things that they could include on their resume or on their LinkedIn to kind of like fight against these industry biases?
Yeah, so I think like the biggest thing that is useful is to think about these things in the beginning of your career, right? Think about how important they are. And then, hopefully you can like think about these decisions you're making in your career and think how they're reflecting to employers. That's like probably the biggest piece of advice. But also be prepared to talk about these things. Like if it's something that you think may be a concern or like maybe you have like a jumpy background, be ready to explain the reasons for leaving, what you're wanting to do now, and like why they should hire you. Um, Also, like I think the biggest thing is like it's hard, but tailor your resume for every job differently,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
And like try to make it appeal. So if you're applying to a startup, think about like the things that you've done that would appeal to a startup.
That makes total sense because even like I've talked to candidates who might work at a giant company, but then I come to find out once I talk to them, like, oh, I helped launch this small product or this small team or this, innovation at the company. That experience will lend itself so well at a startup. So I think that makes total sense. What you're saying is just like be specific and include. You're right. It is kind of a pain sometimes to have to change your resume for every single job, but I think that it's really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I see this a ton in like tech, but I'm sure you guys see it in your fields as well.
Oh yeah.
Right?
100%. Yeah. You know what I've actually noticed recently, especially for folks that were impacted by COVID related layoffs, like putting in if something like that happened, like on your actual resume, right? Like the reason why this role ended was we went through a merger or it was impacted by a COVID related layoff. Like you can include that information and it doesn't have to be an entire story. It can literally be just a few words that can help a ton. And I'm a huge advocate of people optimizing their LinkedIn profile too. You have so much space there that you can use and really tell your story. So like utilize the tools that you have at hand. And one of them is going to be LinkedIn. So use that space the best of your ability.
Yeah, actually, I just did a post about this yesterday where like LinkedIn has like opened up all these different reasons for career gaps. Just growing the idea that like it's okay to have career gaps. And it seems like hiring managers are becoming more okay with it, especially with COVID. But hopefully it's something we continue see down the road here. So
I hope so.
I love it. This is super helpful. I like this talent insight because it kind of like gives advice to companies, but also kind of gives some advice to candidates as well. So I always like when we can kind of get both perspectives.
yep, hopefully everybody stay tuned through the whole episode here.
I think we got their attention.
For sure. All right, Zach. Well, thanks for joining us. It was great to have you on the show. We'll look forward to seeing you soon, and great to see you last week in Mexico too.
Yeah, great to see you too. Thanks, Ryan and Emily.